The family dinner. Dad said I'm proud of all my children's. Except the loser sitting at the table. Everyone laughed. I stood up, placed a secret paper on the table, and said, "For you, Dad, happy Father's Day then." I walked outside, took back the luxury car I gave him, and moments later he screamed when he finally opened it. I used to think something was wrong with me, that maybe if I talked less, smiled more, tried harder, he'd love me. But no matter what I did, my dad never looked at me the way he looked at my brothers. Never with pride, never with warmth, just indifference. My name is Alina, and growing up I was the invisible one in my own family. My father, Richard, wasn't the yelling type. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. When I got straight A's in middle school he barely nodded. But when my brother Jake passed a single class he'd been failing, Dad clapped him on the back and said, "That's my boy." I was 12 when I first realized it. It was Father's Day. I'd spent hours making a card, decorating it with glitter, stickers, and a poem I wrote myself. I handed it to him after dinner, my little heart bursting with hope. He glanced at it, muttered thanks, and went right back to watching the game on TV. 5 minutes later, my brother Ryan came in, tossed him a store-bought mug that said "One Dad," and Dad acted like he'd just been handed a trophy at the Super Bowl. I remember standing there, cards still clutched in my hand, wondering why mine wasn't enough. That's what it always came down to. I was never enough. Ryan and Jake were the golden boys. Ryan was the athlete, always breaking school records and getting write-ups in the local paper. Jake was the smooth talker, charming teachers, relatives, and anyone who crossed his path. And me? I was the quiet one. The moody one. The girl who spent too much time in her room, writing stories or drawing. My mother used to try to balance things out. She'd hug me tight and whisper, "You're special too, sweetheart." But even she knew the hierarchy in our house. If Ryan wanted the last slice of pizza, he got it. If Jake needed money, Dad handed it over, no questions asked. I once asked for a new sketchbook and Dad said, "What's the point? You'll quit halfway like everything else." That cut deeper than he'll ever know. At dinner I'd sit quietly while Dad asked my brothers about their plans, their goals, their day. He never asked me. Not once. If I spoke up, it was usually met with a dismissive grunt or a forced smile. I learned to stay quiet to not interrupt the boys' spotlight. But inside me something was growing. Not just sadness, something sharper, anger, a determination I couldn't yet name. I started working harder, pushing myself to excel, not because I thought he'd notice, but because I wanted to matter to someone, even if it was just myself. I stopped trying to win his love. Instead, I focused on building a life he couldn't ignore. A version of me he'd have no choice but to see. I was tired of being the forgotten daughter. One day, I promised myself he'd remember me. Not as the quiet girl he dismissed, but as the woman who changed everything. If you ever walked into our house during the holidays, you'd think you were watching commercial for the perfect American family. Laughter echoing from the kitchen, my brothers throwing a football in the backyard, Dad grinning with a beer in hand. But I knew the truth. I knew what it felt like to be the background in someone else's highlight reel. My brothers Jake and Ryan were born to shine. At least, that's how my father made it seem. Jake, the eldest, could charm the stripes off a tiger. He was the guy who never studied, but somehow still passed with a wink and a smirk. Dad adored him. They had inside jokes, matching fishing hats, and a handshake they'd made up when Jake was 10. I remember watching them once, from the hallway, as Jake showed Dad a business idea scribbled on a napkin. Dad looked at him like he'd just solved world hunger. "Attaboy," he said, clapping him on the back. "You've got the brain of a leader." Ryan, the youngest, was the golden athlete. Soccer trophies lined his shelves. Dad went to every game, rain or shine, and screamed from the sidelines like a proud high school coach. After Ryan scored a winning goal, Dad threw a full backyard party. Barbecue, music, neighbors invited. I was there too, of course, setting up plates, cleaning up. Me, I got a good job once when I was accepted into the honors program. Just once. No party, no dinner. Just a passing sentence during breakfast in between bites of toast. Honors, that's nice. I studied late into the night, pushed myself in every class, took part-time jobs to afford extra courses. I earned certificates, won quiet awards, even got a scholarship. But my success never sparkled the way theirs did in his eyes. At family dinners, Dad would beam with pride as he talked about Jake's new startup, Orion's training camp. I'd mention my internship at a prestigious firm, and he'd nod, then turn back to my brothers. Anyway, he'd say, "Jake, tell them about that investor meeting." The message was loud and clear: they were the main event. I was the intermission. But the most painful part? I didn't hate my brothers. They were never cruel to me. They loved the spotlight, sure, but they didn't shove me into the dark. It was my father who did that, and I couldn't understand why. I tried everything, being helpful, being independent, being successful. Nothing worked. Sometimes I wondered if he even realized the way his favoritism crushed me. Other times I knew he did and just didn't care. I told myself to let it go, to focus on myself, to not need his validation. But deep down I still wished for it. Just once, I wanted him to say, "I'm proud of you, Alina." Not because he had to, but because he meant it. That moment never came. But another one did, one that would change everything. Not in the way he expected, and certainly not in the way he wanted. It was supposed to be my moment. The culmination of years spent burning the midnight oil, sacrificing social nights, and drowning in self-doubt. I had built my small startup, an innovative digital platform that was set to revolutionize the local market. It wasn't just a business, it was the embodiment of every late night, every tear, and every quiet moment of determination. I had poured my soul into it, believing that finally my worth would be undeniable. The launch event was held in a sleek, modern conference room downtown. Investors, local press, and industry leaders poured in, their eyes full of curiosity and anticipation. I took the stage with a trembling mix of excitement and fear, my heart pounding as if trying to escape the confines of my chest. I began to speak about my vision, the countless hurdles overcome, and the promise of a brighter future that my platform represented. The room was silent, hanging on to every word I uttered. For the first time, I felt seen, really seen, for what I'd achieved on my own merit. After the presentation, the energy in the room shifted. Handshakes and congratulations flowed in, and I even caught snippets of praise from seasoned investors who saw potential in my work. With a cautious smile, I made my way to a quieter corner, allowing myself a brief moment of relief and pride. Yet, as the evening progressed, that pride would soon be shattered. Later that week, the family gathered at home for a celebratory dinner. A habitual reunion that was as much about showcasing accomplishments as it was about displaying hierarchy. In the softly lit dining room, my brothers arrived with their usual effortless confidence, each exchanging stories of victories and milestones. The air was thick with unspoken triumphs that had long been crystallized into our family's tradition of favoritism. When the dinner began, my father, Richard, took his customary seat at the head of the table. Conversation flowed, but inevitably the topic turned to achievements. I expected a moment of quiet acknowledgement, a nod, a word of respect, but instead the narrative swiftly pivoted. My father, with his practiced ease, began recounting the family's latest feats. "Ryan hit his third home run this season," he said, his voice brimming with pride, pausing for laughter from a gathered kin. "And Jake, I hear you've sealed another major deal for your new venture. Fantastic work, son." His words rolled out like well-rehearsed lines at a family play, each one earning its due applause. I cleared my throat, attempting to insert my voice into the conversation. I've just launched my own venture," I began, hopeful. But before I could elaborate, my father interjected with a dismissive gesture. Yes, we know you're busy, dear," he said lightly, almost as if he were referring to an insignificant chore. The room fell into a brief, awkward lull. A few nods were exchanged, but no one picked up on my intended pitch of triumph. That brief dismissal, that cold interruption, sent a shock through me. I remembered the countless times I had announced my small victories, only to have them reduced to mere background noise, overshadowed by the loud accolades of my brothers. In that moment, the weight of every ignored effort, every snub compliment, and every unspoken disregard crashed down like a tidal wave. The seeds of change had been sown. Sitting there, amidst the clamor of celebration for my brothers, I felt a fierce, burning clarity. I realized that no matter how far I climbed, or how many milestones I reached, I would never be acknowledged by the person whose approval I had craved for so long. It was in that heart-shattering instant that I understood I could no longer play the quiet part in this tragic family drama. I would build a life so brilliant, so undeniable, that he could no longer dismiss me. And if he continued to steal my moments, then perhaps he'd finally face the consequences of his endless favoritism. After that dinner, something inside me shut down, not out of anger, but clarity. I stopped trying, not in the sense of giving up, but in the sense of no longer seeking approval that would never come. I didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't ask to be heard anymore. I simply went quiet. I started spending less time at family gatherings and more time in silence, just me and my goals. I moved out of the city, rented a modest but quiet apartment on the edge of town, and dove into my work like it was oxygen. The startup that I had launched, barely noticed by my own family, was now my world. It didn't pay much at first. I had weeks where dinner was just toast and instant coffee. I had to take freelance projects on the side to stay afloat. There were nights I cried quietly under my desk, questioning if I was even built for this. But for every doubt, there was a flicker of determination. I had no one clapping for me, no one cheering me on, but I was finally building for myself. I learned to fix bugs, write pitches, handle rejections, and chase clients with the kind of hunger only someone used to being overlooked could ever understand. Some nights, I would scroll through social media and see photos of Jake at business conferences with Dad by his side, or Ryan holding yet another trophy with a caption about making the family proud. I'd feel that familiar sting, like a wound reopening, but I didn't let it stop me. Instead, I'd take a deep breath, close the app, and get back to work. My success wouldn't come from applause. It would come from perseverance. I grew in silence. No fancy updates, no family newsletters, just long nights, stubborn effort, and the occasional client saying, "You're the only one who actually listened to what we needed." Those words felt better than anything my father could have said because they were real. After a year, the company started gaining traction. Our user base grew. A niche investor found potential in what we were doing and poured in seed money. I finally hired a small team, people who, like me, knew what it felt like to be underestimated. Together, we built something incredible. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't send out the usual holiday emails. I didn't show up at family events with success stories to toss around like confetti. I let them assume I was the same girl in the background, living small. That's how I wanted it. But, within me, everything was changing. My posture shifted. My voice got firmer. I wasn't afraid to take up space anymore. I didn't need their validation. I had found something better. I had found me. For the first time in my life, I made decisions without second-guessing. I bought my first car on my own. I signed the lease to a sleek office space with floor-to-ceiling windows, and I did it without needing someone to tell me, "Good job." I became the woman I had once only dreamed of becoming, the one my younger self thought she had to become for them. But now I was doing it for me. And in all that silence, I was building something far more powerful than a career. I was building freedom. I still remember the first time I walked past a mirror and didn't flinch. My reflection didn't look like the forgotten daughter anymore. She looked like someone who had clawed her way out of invisibility and created a life of her own design. And it wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet strength, the kind that doesn't beg to be seen, but can't be ignored. And soon, they wouldn't be able to ignore me either. Not after what I was about to do. I hadn't been home in almost 2 years. Not for birthdays, not for holidays. Not even for the obligatory phone calls. The silence was mutual. No one reached out to check on me, and I didn't expect them to. That's the thing about being forgotten. You eventually become comfortable with your own absence, but this year, I made a decision. I recipe'd to the annual Father's Day dinner. No explanation, no follow-up, just a simple, "I'll be there" in the family group chat. The reactions were a mix of emojis and passive silence. I could almost feel the awkwardness through the screen. The night before, I stood in front of a sleek black luxury car in a dealership showroom, signing paperwork under a fake last name I had legally changed to after launching my business. They wouldn't even recognize it. None of them had ever asked what I was doing or who I was becoming. Next to me sat a small black envelope. The edges were crisp, the paper heavy and expensive. Inside was a single legal document that would change everything. Father's Day arrived. I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to remind myself who I had become. Confidence in every inch of fabric, power in every step. When I pulled into the driveway, the car's engine purred like a warning. My siblings were already there, clinking glasses and laughing on the patio. Dad was at the head of the table, grinning wide, drink in hand. The favorite role he played so well. His eyes flicked toward me, and for a moment, confusion broke through his usual smugness. Then a smile. "Well, look who finally decided to show up." Everyone turned. I could feel their surprise and judgment settle into the air. I smiled politely. "Hi everyone, happy Father's Day, Dad." The dinner was the same mix of forced laughs and subtle jabs. Jake talked about his new condo. Ryan bragged about another promotion. Dad nodded and beamed, like a king surrounded by princes. And then came the moment. I stood up slowly, the quiet drawing everyone's attention. I brought something for you, I said, looking directly at Dad. I walked outside, leaving the door open behind me. Moments later, I drove the luxury car into the driveway. Sleek, black, impossible to ignore. I got out, walked back inside, and laid the small black envelope on the table in front of him. For you, Dad, Happy Father's Day. Gasps rippled through the room. Is that a car? Jake asked, squinting toward the driveway. Ryan leaned forward. Wait, you bought that? Dad looked from the keys to me, completely stunned. He picked up the envelope, his fingers trembling a little. What's this? Just open it, I said quietly, my voice calm and steady. Everyone leaned in as he slipped the paper out. For a second his expression didn't change, then his eyes started darting over the page, and slowly his face drained of color. His jaw clenched. What is this? He barked, now glaring at me. I gave him a long, unreadable smile. Read it carefully, you'll see. And with that, I turned, walked out the door and got into the car. I drove away as the shouting started behind me. Because that envelope? It wasn't just paper, it was the ownership document of the company that had just acquired the firm he worked for. His job, his pride, his status, all now under my control. Happy Father's Day indeed. The house looked the same, tastefully decorated, spotless, cold. My mother moved in and out of the dining room like a silent shadow, refilling glasses and smiling at jokes that weren't funny. My brothers were already a few drinks in, and the air felt thick with old habits and unspoken rules. I sat quietly at the end of the table, the black envelope resting in my purse, heavy like heartbeat. The car keys were tucked safely into my coat pocket, parked just outside the window in full view of the driveway. The conversation swirled around me like I wasn't even there. Ryan talked about his latest investment win. Jake cracked jokes about people who still rent, and Dad of course nodded in approval, soaking in the pride like sunlight. So how's business, Dad? Jake asked, lifting his glass. Dad chuckled. Busy as always. But you know, not everyone is cut out for this kind of pressure, takes real backbone. He looked at Ryan. Good thing I've got two sons who aren't afraid to lead. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, it wasn't even subtle anymore. Then he glanced down the table toward me. I could feel the moment shift before he even opened his mouth. And then there's the loser, sitting at the table, he said, gesturing toward me with a smirk. Still pretending to be the black sheep, the laughter exploded. Jake nearly choked on his drink. Ryan laughed so hard he had to slap the table. My hands stayed folded in my lap. I didn't blink, I didn't smile, I just waited. When the laughter finally died down, I stood up, slowly, calmly, the way you move when you already know how the story ends. I actually brought you something, Dad, I said, pulling the envelope from my purse. A little Father's Day gift. The room stilled. Even the air seemed to pause. I walked down the length of the table and placed the envelope directly in front of him. He glanced at it, puzzled. What is this? Just open it, I said, then stepped back and folded my arms. He ripped the flap with dramatic flair, as if expecting a joke or cash. His fingers unfolded the paper, and as his eyes began to scan the words, the color in his face changed. First confusion, then disbelief, then a slow, creeping horror. What the hell is this? He asked, looking up at my eyes narrowing. You remember Anderson Tech? The company you've worked at for the last 10 years. I said softly. It's under new ownership, a beat. I bought it, I continued, through a silent acquisition, effective last week. The silence was immediate, deafening. I leaned in slightly and added, so no, I'm not the loser at the table. I'm the woman who just became your boss's boss. His mouth opened but no words came out. Jake looked pale. Ryan dropped his fork. And that car out front, I said, glancing toward the window. That was part of the presentation, but I'll be taking it with me now. I turned without waiting for permission, walked outside, and slid into the driver's seat. The sound of the engine roared to life. And just as I pulled away, I heard it, his scream from the open front door. It wasn't anger, it was fear. The car's engine hummed steadily as I drove away from the house. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, the weight of what I had just done settling into my chest. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about something much deeper. For years I had let myself shrink in the shadows of a family that never truly saw me, and now? Now I was standing tall, casting a shadow they couldn't ignore. But the weight of the moment wasn't the only thing pulling at me. I knew what was happening behind me. I could picture it as clearly as if I were still sitting at that table, hearing the deafening silence that followed my words. I wasn't there anymore, but my actions would speak louder than anything I could have said. Back inside, my father's hands were shaking as he held the paper. He looked from it to his son's, his lips moving as though he were trying to find words that wouldn't come. I could see the panic beginning to bloom, creeping through every muscle in his body, spreading like a virus. "Dad?" Jake asked, his voice suddenly small. He stood up, coming around to where Dad sat frozen, the papers still gripped tightly in his hands. "What's going on?" Ryan, the ever-confident one, had already stood up as well, trying to peek over their father's shoulder. "What is that? It looks like wait, is that real?" Dad didn't answer. His eyes were glued to the document, his fingers skimming the words but failing to make sense of them. The words on the page were simple enough, but for him, they were a death sentence. I could already hear their questions in my mind. The panic, the disbelief, the frantic rush to understand what was happening. They'd always relied on him for answers. Now the answers were slipping away, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Finally, Jake couldn't take the silence anymore. "Dad, what does it say? What's going on?" Dad looked up, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't catch his breath. It's a transfer of property," he muttered, his voice weak. "A reversal of assets, all of it. The company, the house, my shares." The panic in his voice was palpable. His sons froze. Ryan blinked in disbelief. "Wait, you're telling me this document means she owns everything?" The realization hit them like a slap. The silence deepened, but this time it wasn't awkward, it was suffocating. My father had always been the pillar, the one everyone turned to for stability. But now he was the one on his knees, his empire crumbling before his eyes. His sons had no idea how to process it. Jake staggered back from the table, his face going red. How could she do this?" he hissed, his voice rising in anger. She's nothing. We're the ones who worked for this. How could she?" Dad held up a shaking hand, his mind still trying to catch up with the magnitude of what had just happened. She's not nothing," he said, his voice cracking. "She's everything." Ryan's eyebrows furrowed, his earlier cockiness replaced with uncertainty. "What do you mean, Dad? What's going on?" "How could she owns it all," Dad said, his voice barely a whisper. "She owns the company, she owns the house, everything. Everything I've worked for, it's hers now." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The sons who had once worshipped their father, who had seen him as the king of their world, were now faced with a reality they could hardly comprehend. They hadn't even considered her as a contender. To them I was the shadow, the forgotten one, the one who wasn't enough. But now I was the one who held the power. "I don't understand," Jake said, his voice shaking now. "How could she? When did this happen? Why didn't we know?" Dad finally looked up, his face etched with defeat. "She didn't want you to know. She didn't need to tell you. She doesn't need us." Ryan took a step back, trying to collect himself. "But how did she get this much? How?" "She didn't ask for anything," Dad said, his voice cold now. "She just took it." The room was frozen in disbelief, the wake of the betrayal, of my quiet, calculated rise, settling over them all. For the first time in their lives, my brothers were forced to confront the reality they had been so blind to for years. I was not the failure they thought I was. I was the one who had worked silently without the applause, without the validation. And now, everything they depended on was mine. My father let out a long, ragged sigh. "She's smarter than I gave her credit for," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "And I'll never be able to take that back." The fear, the panic, it was all there, written on their faces. But for me, it was the start of something new, the start of me taking my place in the world, not as the forgotten daughter, but as the woman who had finally earned her right to be seen. I didn't look back as I walked away from that house. The weight that had been holding me down for so long, the constant need to prove myself, the hunger for approval that would never come, finally lifted. I had made it. Not because they'd recognized me, but because I had recognized myself. The phone buzzed with messages. The family was scrambling, trying to figure out what I had done, why I had left so suddenly, and what that paper meant. I knew they would be in shock, especially my father, but I didn't care. I had already taken what I needed from them. The power to stand on my own, to walk away from everything I had once thought I needed. I wasn't the girl they always ignored. I wasn't the daughter they thought they could control or dismiss. I was my own person now, free from the chains of their expectations. As the evening went on, I knew they were probably still sitting there, staring at that paper, trying to comprehend the magnitude of it. My father, who had always dismissed my efforts, would now understand what I was capable of, but it would be too late. All those years of neglect, of treating me as second best, had finally caught up with him. The house would never be the same. The balance of power had shifted, and I was no longer the one they could manipulate or overlook. The siblings who had always competed for his affection, who had never seen me as a true equal, would finally understand that I wasn't just a side player in their world. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love or their recognition. I had created a life for myself that didn't depend on them. I was successful, independent, and finally at peace. And when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw someone who had fought for her place in the world. Someone who didn't need to look back to know she had won. The door was closed. I had walked out, but I had also walked into my own future, one that was all mine.
At my sister's wedding, my stepmom blocked me, shouting, "Who let you in to run this wedding?" I calmly replied, "It's my sister's wedding. I don't need anyone's permission to be here." Enraged, she grabbed my hair and hit me by saying, "Get on your knees and apologize to her." Elle left, but a few hours later they called me in a panic. I'm 33 years old, doing well in my marketing career, and thought I had finally figured out how to manage all the drama in my family. But everything took a turn when my younger sister Janet started planning her wedding. I wanted nothing more than to help her create the perfect day, but I quickly realized it was going to be way more complicated than I had anticipated. The biggest shadow looming over the entire event was our dad, Jeremy. Ever since his divorce, he hasn't been the same. He's been struggling, slipping deeper into a cycle of drinking and making poor choices. And in my opinion, one of the worst choices he's made is his new girlfriend, Julie. From the moment I met her, I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. Something about her just didn't sit right with me. One afternoon while Janet and I were at a flower shop picking out arrangements, she suddenly turned to me, her face clouded with worry. "Deborah, do you think Dad will actually show up sober?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with desperation. I took a deep breath, trying to stay optimistic for her sake. "I really hope so," I said, forcing a smile. "For your sake, Janet, I truly do." But deep down I wasn't so sure. Hoping for the best didn't feel like enough, and the closer we got to the wedding day, the more I felt like I wasn't just your maid of honor. I was becoming a full-time peacekeeper. My boyfriend Aaron was a rock through it all. He always knew how to calm me down when I was spiraling. "Babe, you can't control everything." He'd remind me gently whenever I got too worked up. I know, I'd reply, though in my heart the worry wouldn't let me rest. I couldn't help thinking, if Dad ruins Janet's wedding, I'll never forgive him. But as stressful as everything already was, I had no idea things were about to get even worse. About a week before the wedding, I met up with my best friend Christina for coffee. Christina has always been my go-to for advice, the voice of reason I desperately needed. I spilled everything to her, hoping she could help me untangle the mess in my head. "What's really going on with you and Julie?" Christina asked, raising an eyebrow as she leaned closer. Her tone told me she already suspected something was up. I glanced around nervously, lowering my voice as if someone might overhear us. "There's just something off about her, Christina," I admitted. "The way she latched onto Dad so quickly, how she's always whispering things to him. And get this, one night I overheard Julie on the phone talking about some big score she was planning. Her tone was low and secretive, and my gut immediately twisted." Christina's eyes widened as I shared this with her. "You think she's scamming your dad?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm going to find out." That conversation lit a fire in me. I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right, and I needed answers. Late at night after work, I found myself scrolling through Julie's social media, trying to connect the dots. I even made quiet calls to a few of Dad's old friends, hoping they might shed some light on our sudden presence in his life. The deeper I dug, the more uneasy I felt. It was like piecing together a puzzle, but I wasn't sure I wanted to know what picture would emerge once it was complete. The day before the wedding, Janet and I were at the venue doing some final checks. The decorations were coming together beautifully, and for a moment, I let myself relax, but that calm shattered when Dad and Julie showed up unannounced. "Daddy!" Janet squealed, running to him with open arms. Her joy was palpable, but my heart sank the moment I saw him. His smile was sloppy, his words slurred. He was already drunk. Julie, on the other hand, looked composed, too composed. Her sharp eyes darted around the room like she was sizing everything up. "Andre, darling," she purred, wrapping her arm around him. "Let's go check out the bar." She glanced at me with a smug, knowing expression before leading him away. Anger boiled inside me, but I swallowed it for Janet's sake. I turned to her just as her happy expression faltered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Deborah," she started, her voice trembling. I pulled her into a tight hug before she could say anything else. "Don't worry, sis," I whispered firmly. "Tomorrow is about you and Patrick. Nothing is going to ruin it." But deep down I wasn't so sure. They say there's always a calm before the storm, and ours was brewing. Little did I know, it would hit with the force of a hurricane. The wedding ceremony itself was breathtaking. Janet looked absolutely radiant in her gown, her face glowing with happiness as she exchanged vows with Patrick. For a brief shining moment, it felt like all the chaos had melted away. Watching her up there, I let myself hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this day without any major disasters. But that fragile hope didn't last. The moment we walked into the reception, my stomach dropped. There he was, Dad, standing by the bar, drink in hand, with Julie clinging to his arm like she was afraid to let go. His face was flushed and his laughter was far too loud. It was painfully obvious that he was drunk again. Aaron, who had been by my side all day, leaned in close, his voice soft. "You okay?" he asked, sensing my tension. I clenched my fist, trying to steady my breathing. "I've got to hold it together for Janet," I muttered, forcing a tight smile. But inside, I was raging. All I wanted was for Janet to have the perfect day she deserved. But as I watched Dad stumble over to a group of guests, sloshing his drink and laughing too loudly, I knew the storm was about to break, and it wasn't going to be pretty. I forced a smile, muttering reassurances, but deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before things went completely off the rails. The tension in the room thickened as the evening wore on. Dad's laughter became louder, his movements sloppier, and Julie's eyes darted around the venue with a gleam that made my stomach twist. Something felt deeply wrong and I couldn't shake the unease. "Deborah," Janet whispered, tugging on my arm, her voice trembling. "Dad's making a scene." I turned to her, forcing a confident tone I didn't feel. "I'll handle it," I promised. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward where Dad was attempting a wobbly Macarena, laughing uproariously and nearly toppling over with each move. He looked like he didn't have a care in the world, or a shred of self-awareness. "Dad," I said, keeping my tone as calm as possible. "Let's step outside for some fresh air." "Nonsense," he slurred, waving me off dramatically. "I'm celebrating my baby girl's big day." He attempted a clumsy twirl and nearly crashed into a nearby table. Before I could steady him, Julie materialized at his side, gripping his arm tightly. "Leave him alone," she snapped, her tone sharp and defensive. "He's just having fun." "This isn't about fun," I replied evenly, though my voice was tight with frustration. "It's about respecting Janet on her special day." Julie's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Always acting like you're in charge, like you're better than everyone else." The words hit a nerve. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "This isn't about me, it's about Janet. She deserves better than the circus." The argument escalated quickly, and in an effort to keep things from blowing up in the middle of the reception, I motioned for us to step into a quieter corner. But our voices rose with each exchange, the tension between us boiling over. "You don't know anything about our family," I spat, my patience fraying as I stared her down. Julie's face darkened. "I know one thing," she hissed. "Your daddy prefers my company over yours." The words hit like a slap. Something inside me snapped. "Oh, really?" I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. "Is that before or after you drained him of his money, Julie's?" Her face twisted with fury, and before I had time to process what was happening, she lunged at me. In one swift motion, she yanked off her heeled sandal and swung it at my head. Time seemed as slow as I felt the sharp impact of the heel connecting with my temple. Pain radiated through my skull, and everything around me erupted into chaos. Guests screamed and scattered, chairs overturned, and the room filled with panicked shouts and gasps. Through the haze of pain and confusion, I could only think of Janet. How had it come to this? I had promised to protect her happiness, yet here we were, her wedding day spiraling into a nightmare. I caught sight of Janet's horrified face in the crowd. Patrick held her back, his arms wrapped protectively around her as she sobbed, frozen in disbelief. My heart shattered at the sight, knowing this was supposed to be her perfect day and it was anything but. Security rushed in, grabbing Julie and pulling her away as she thrashed and screamed obscenities at anyone within earshot. Her wild shrieks echoed through the venue, adding to the chaos. I stood there, dazed, clutching the side of my head, feeling the sting of tears and the throbbing pain from the blow. Around me, the once joyous reception was now a blur of scattered guests, toppled decorations and shocked whispers. It was supposed to be a day of celebration, a memory Janet would cherish forever. Instead, it had turned into a nightmare none of us would forget. I stood frozen in place as the police arrived, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow over what was supposed to have been a magical evening. Julie was led away in handcuffs, her defiant screams echoing in the night. In that brief moment, I caught a glimpse of Dad. He looked completely lost, his face etched with confusion and pain. For the first time, I realized things would never be the same. The days after the wedding were a blur. Between filing police reports, giving interviews, and enduring countless sleepless nights, I felt like I was living in a nightmare that wouldn't end. Every sound made me jump, and the image of Julie lunging at me with her sandal replayed in my mind over and over like a cruel, unrelenting loop. Aaron, my rock through everything, held me close whenever the nightmares hit. "You're safe now, Deborah," he'd whisper, his voice calm and soothing. But no matter how many times he said it, feeling safe seemed impossible. How could I when my own father's girlfriend had attacked me at my sister's wedding? How do you even begin to heal from something like that? Janet, understandably, was a wreck. When I visited her about a week later, she looked like a shell of herself. Her once bright eyes were dull, and she couldn't even meet my gaze. "All those months of planning," she said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "And for what? My wedding will always be remembered as the day someone tried to hurt my sister." "Janet, I'm so sorry," I began, the guilt weighing heavily on me. I had promised to protect her happiness, and I had failed. She shook her head, cutting me off. I know it's not your fault, Deborah, but still I can't help feeling like our family is cursed or something. While Janet was drowning in her own pain, Dad was living in complete denial. He called me constantly, leaving voicemails that made my blood boil. Deborah, sweetie, let's not blow this out of proportion, one message began. Julie was just upset. She didn't mean any harm. Hearing him defend her like that after everything she had done made my stomach churn with anger. How could he excuse her actions? How could he still be on her side? The final straw came a few days later when Dad showed up in my apartment, reeking of alcohol. I opened the door to find him swaying slightly, his eyes glassy and unfocused. Dad, you need to leave, I said, my voice as steady as I could manage. But Pumpkin, we're family, he slurred, his tone pitiful. We need to stick together. Something hardened inside me as I looked at him, this broken, unrecognizable version of the man who had once been my father. No, Dad, I said firmly, we're done. I can't do this anymore. The hurt in his eyes almost made me waver, almost. But as I closed the door in his face, I knew I had made the right decision. Some wounds couldn't heal if I kept reopening them. Meanwhile, Christina, my ever-determined best friend, had taken it upon herself to dig into Julie's past. One evening she called me over to her apartment, her voice tinged with urgency. When I arrived, she spread a pile of papers across her coffee table. Deborah, look at this, she said, her tone grim. Julie's got a record. Assault, fraud, theft, you name it. I stared at the papers in disbelief, my mind reeling. There it was in black and white, proof of everything I had suspected but never had the courage to voice. Julie wasn't just toxic, she was dangerous. I scanned the documents, each page twisting my stomach tighter with a sickening realization. How could Dad not know about this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Christina hesitated, her lips pressed tightly together. Then, she sighed. That's the thing, Deborah, she said, her tone heavy. I think he did know. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I stared at her, willing her to say she was wrong, but she wasn't. The evidence was right in front of me. Joint bank accounts, suspicious money transfers, and other financial red flags. It wasn't just that Dad had been manipulated by Julie. He had participated. He wasn't just a victim. He was an accomplice. Telling Janet what we had discovered was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. We sat together in her small, cozy kitchen, the unopened wedding gifts stacked in the corner, like relics of a dream turned sour. I can't believe it, Janet whispered, tears streaming down her face. How could he do this to us? How could he let her? She trailed off, shaking her head. I don't even know him anymore. I reached for her hand, my heart aching for her. I don't know who Dad is either, I admitted softly, but right now we need to protect ourselves. We can't let this pull us down. Janet looked up at me, her tear-streaked face hardening with resolve. I'm with you, Deborah, always. Her determination gave me strength, but it didn't erase the guilt that clung to me. By exposing Dad's crimes, I had effectively destroyed whatever was left of his life. Yet deep down I knew I wasn't the one who had ruined him. He had done that all on his own. The mix of anger, confusion, and guilt became too much to handle on my own, so I decided to get help. That's how I found myself sitting in a therapist's office for the first time, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. It's normal to feel conflicted, my therapist Dr. Frank reassured me during one of our sessions. Her voice was calm and steady, like an anchor in the storm of my emotions. You've been through something traumatic. You're grieving the loss of the father you thought you knew. I stared at my hands, feeling the sting of tears I wasn't ready to shed. But shouldn't I hate him after everything he's done? There's no should when it comes to emotions, she said gently. What's important is that you acknowledge how you feel and give yourself the space to work through it. Working through it sounded simple when she said it, but it wasn't. The pain, anger, and betrayal didn't disappear overnight. But as I left her office that day, I felt a tiny flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild something good from the ruins of my family's past. 5 months after the wedding disaster, I found myself in a place I never thought I'd be happy. Despite everything that had happened, I realized I was surrounded by love and support. Janet, Aaron, Christina, and I had become an unbreakable team. Our shared pain had forged a bond stronger than ever before. One night, the four of us were gathered around my dining table, sharing dinner and laughter. The apartment was filled with warmth, the kind of joy I had once feared I'd lost forever. Janet raised her glass, a small but genuine smile lighting up her face. To new beginnings, she said, her voice steady with hope, and to family, the one we choose. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. In that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, I had the strength to face it, and I had my chosen family by my side. I raised my glass, clinking it with my sisters, a smile tugging at my lips. The toast felt like a symbolic closing of one chapter and the start of another. But as Janet and I shared a moment of calm, the storm surrounding Julie's trial raged on, drawing the attention of every media outlet in town. The courtroom had become a circus, and sitting there day after day my stomach churned as more of Julie's dark history came to light. Dad sat beside me, his face pale and frozen in disbelief, as her past crimes were laid bare, fraud, theft, and manipulation stretching back years. Each new revelation was like another dagger to our already wounded family, but the most shocking moment hadn't even arrived yet. Behind the scenes, Christina and I had been working tirelessly to uncover the full extent of Dad's involvement in Julie's schemes. We pored over bank records, emails, and financial transactions, piecing together a picture that was far worse than I'd feared. When our lawyer stood up during the trial, I felt my breath catch in my throat. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clear and steady, "we have documentation proving Jeremy Messing's involvement in Miss Lang's fraudulent activities." The courtroom fell silent, and I heard Dad inhale sharply beside me. I couldn't bring myself to look at him. The truth was finally out. He wasn't just a victim of Julie's manipulation. He had played an active role in her schemes. As the legal drama unfolded, my personal life took a surprising and uplifting turn. One sunny Thursday afternoon, my boss called me into his office. I walked in nervously, unsure of what to expect, but his warm smile immediately set me at ease. "Deborah," he said, leaning forward, "we've been incredibly impressed with your work. Your resilience and creativity over the past year have been outstanding. I'm happy to let you know we're promoting you to Senior Marketing Director." I stared at him in disbelief. "Thank you. I don't even know what to say." "You've earned it," he said simply, shaking my hand. The moment I left his office, I pulled out my phone to call Aaron. "You won't believe this," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. "I got promoted." Aaron's joyful laugh echoed through the line. "That's amazing, babe. I'm so proud of you. We need to celebrate tonight." Even amidst all the chaos, there were glimmers of hope and joy. Janet and Patrick, determined to move forward, made a beautiful decision. They decided to renew their vows. This time it wasn't an elaborate event. It was a small, intimate ceremony in their backyard with only close friends and family. "Second time's the charm," Patrick joked, his warm smile making Janet laugh as they exchanged rings again. Watching them, I felt a deep sense of peace. The wounds from the past weren't gone, but they were healing slowly but surely. Finally, the day of Julie's sentencing arrived. The courtroom was thick with tension as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Sitting there, I reflected on how much had changed since that disastrous wedding day. We had been through so much pain and betrayal, but somehow we had survived. We had grown stronger. We were moving forward. When the judge called for victim impact statements, I stood up, my hands trembling slightly but my voice firm. "The scars from that night run deep," I began, my gaze steady, "but they've made me stronger. What happened shattered parts of my family and left wounds I never thought would heal. Yet through that pain, I found resilience, I found strength, and I found the family I choose to stand beside me." As I spoke, I could feel the weight lifting from my chest. This was my moment to reclaim control, to stand up not just for myself but for Janet, for my family, and for the life we were rebuilding. When I finished, the room was silent for a beat before the judge nodded solemnly. Julie received her sentence, and with it came a sense of closure. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt the sunlight on my face and realized something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The storm had passed. We weren't the same as we had been before, but we were stronger. We had found our way back to each other, and together we were finally ready to embrace the future. I locked eyes with Julie, feeling a surge of strength. This was my moment to reclaim my life, to draw a line between the person I had been and the survivor I had become. "I'm here today," I said, my voice steady, not as a victim, but as a survivor. As Julie was led away in handcuffs, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. It was as if the weight of that long, painful chapter was finally being lifted. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe freely. But the real celebration came a month later. Janet, Patrick, Aaron, Christina, and I gathered at my favorite restaurant to celebrate my promotion and everything we had overcome together. The evening was warm and full of light, the kind of night that reminds you life can be good again. "To Deborah," Christina said, raising her glass, her smile wide and proud, "the strongest person I know." I couldn't let her finish without chiming in. "To all of us," I added, lifting my glass and glancing around the table. These were the people who had stood by me through the hardest year of my life, the ones who never let me fall when everything felt like it was crumbling. For proving that family isn't just about blood, but about loyalty and love. We clinked glasses and the sound of laughter filled the air. As we shared stories, teasing each other and reminiscing about the highs and lows, I felt something shift inside me. I realized how much had changed, not just in my life but in me. The past year had been like a nightmare filled with pain, betrayal, and loss, but in a strange way, it had also been a gift. It had shown me who really mattered, taught me how strong I could be, and gave me the courage to cut out the toxicity that had been holding me back. Sitting there, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. This wasn't the perfect happy ending I had dreamed of as a little girl. It came with scars and memories I wished I could erase, but it was real, and that made it beautiful. For the second time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. I was grateful for the family I had found, the love that surrounded me, and the strength I had discovered within myself. And so that's where my story ends, or at least this chapter of it. But now I'm curious. If you were in my shoes, would you have given your father another chance after everything he did? Or would you have kept those boundaries in place like I did? It's a tough decision, and I know many of you have faced similar struggles with toxic family members. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments. How have you handled difficult family dynamics in your own lives? If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more real-life stories and honest conversations about navigating complicated relationships. Together, we can find strength in sharing, and maybe even help someone else find their way through the storm.